What is your creative mark or style that makes you different from another professional in your line of work? In other words, what defines your creative identity? So this question was prompted by something Len said to me ahead of the panel, that Blackness is wrongly considered monolithic. To quote Haitian-American designer Victor Glamour, Black people aren't a monolith. We don't all have the same point of view and outlook and direction. In other words, being Black doesn't mean you have the exact same references and influences as a Black colleague in the fashion industry or otherwise. And so in asking this question, I'd like to explore the breadth of identities that exist amongst us. Now, Vanessa, I would love to start with you. Len recalls a hilarious expression you shared at a panel you participated in last year, which is, put your stank on it. So I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay. You have to say it stank, though. You have to.
I to you.
So it sort of was my way of, when you're talking about your creative identity, about your creative mark and like your point of difference, and that is ultimately what is going to lead you to your greatest execution of your creativity. So you can call it style or stank or magic. But for me, my creative identity, interestingly enough, was largely shaped by the barriers and the boundaries that I kind of may have come up against, whether it was not feeling like it didn't belong or actually not belonging, whether it was not looking like everybody or not looking like everybody enough, whatever it was, I felt left out of a conversation. And I didn't even know what conversations were taking place or even what room those conversations were taking place in. And those boundaries forced me to develop my creativity in a way that I had to push through, constraints. I had to push through barriers. I had to find ultimate other ways, other solutions. I had to try to do things differently. And I had big dreams, and working within constraints, it helped me to actually be more agile, think differently, and really be an observer as much as someone who's taking part in something. So yeah, so I would say the stank really, it's a little bit of an attitude, sure. But largely it comes from being focused on inclusion and community and communication. And that's less about what you wear and more about like who you are.
For me, I always say the type of content I'm really passionate about creating really comes from an inclusive and intersectional lens. And that all stems from my lived experience as a woman of color. To get really specific, as a Jamaican St. Lucian woman of color who grew up in a very white dominated community in Western Canada, and just like never seeing herself reflected in the people around her, and who loved consuming media as I still do today. But again, never really seeing stories I felt like spoke to me that like really told my narrative. And I really struggled with my identity for years and really fought, I can say like I fought my Blackness. And I just really wish I had content that I just felt like made me feel like, I'm more than enough, that I belong, that my type of beauty is beautiful. And I know that type of feeling of feeling excluded is far from just mine. You speak to any person of color, and I'm sure that will ring true to them too. So I just really strive to create content where I try and put that mark as much as possible. My
introduction to the industry was, I was born in Jamaica, raised in Jamaica, and Chinese Jamaican. And, my experience was much like a lot of people coming into the business was difficult for me, but it also helped me define who I was. And I used it, to be honest with you, the business became a way of defining who I was and traveling to places that I'd never been before, emotionally and spiritually. I was on the front end of the camera for a few years, and then I moved to production and behind the camera, where actually that's where my real passion is. And in short, what I love to do now, and I think if it's going to be my stank, is I love supporting the people that I work with, whether they're the models or the hair and makeup artists or the photographers. It's a more behind the scenes role, but it's lifting them up and giving them opportunity.
I have a style, I think, that comes out through my pictures, which is like a straight up modern approach to making photographs that I feel like is modern and timeless. When it comes to being a person of color, I've always treated people of color with a certain light. I've found people say about my work, like, oh my God, you treat Black skin like so beautifully. It's like, really, I try to treat all skin beautifully because we're all beautiful. It's just for me, because I'm a visible minority, I would always push visible minorities in my portfolio. I would always go to the agency, and funny, I'm a Black man, and they'd be like, hey, we got this great Black girl for you to shoot. So in the beginning, it was all about me giving people who look like me proper light. I think I would like to say Ian Hilton, who is a stylist that I met years ago. He was like really the first stylist who saw me when I was 19, and it's like, you're talented. Nobody in the industry looks like you. You should be a fashion photographer. Like, let's get this. So, I mean, to sum up, just touching on inclusion, I feel like it's super important for all of us to like help the people who look like us, because I mean, I'm not trying to say like it's an us and them. As you can look at my work, like I show all faces from all different ethnic backgrounds, but I just feel like I like to give the same kind of light to faces that look like me that that I guess other photographers give to faces that look like them. Like I really feel like it's important with our identity and with our identity to elevate our image. And I'm in the business of elevating people.
I lived through, as a child, mind you, but I lived through Jamaican independence. So I have a vague understanding of what colonialism was like to my parents and my grandparents. And I grew up in a culture that adored pageantry and beauty, beautiful women and their pageantry. So it's not surprising that I was attracted to the beauty and fashion industry. And when we emigrated here and I made it to university, I had the nerve to try and do my thesis on the emergence of a Canadian fashion industry in journalism. And there was hardly any research to be found. But lo and behold, I hung in there and I was part of a wave, not the first generation to make their mark, maybe the second and the third. And I came in on the shoulders of other Black models and other producers who'd been working here. And I was able to find a spot for my talent. And I'm lucky that that happened. I know many people who have talent who did not find the opportunities, but I was fortunate, and I thank the people who gave me those opportunities. And they were meaningful. They were also very difficult as well to navigate. But as I moved on, I always had in my mind to try and bring in and introduce as many colleagues, my own Black colleagues, as I could, no matter where. And where I really enjoyed this function actually was at Chatelaine magazine, because it was national and there was an opportunity, and it wasn't glamour. It was about real people, as we like to say. And I really enjoyed that.
So my stank. There was a couturier by the name of Winston Kong who took me under his wing when I was a young startup. He liked me right away, and I was part of his family. He made very expensive dresses for very wealthy ladies to stomp around at the Royal Winter Fair in the muck and mud. I thought, wow, this is so decadent. This is crazy. I said, Winston, how do you take an emerald silk taffeta ball gown, skirt, a yellow bodice, a pink cabbage rose at her hip, and tons of jewelry and red lips, and you sell it so, for so much? He said, well, it's my charm, Lenny. And the fact is, I'm Jamaican. And I realized that it's his Jamaicanism that made his color, made his cocktail dresses, made his chic. He opened my eyes to chic women, Diane Carroll, Munia at Saint Laurent, all of these great, elegant Black women. And I got to appreciate that. So I thank Winston for that. It was the way that I started to produce shows. That's how I lit shows, that I offset the color of a dress with a contrasting backlight and played with color so that there was this beautiful tableau when a scene opened. That was my thing. Years later, I got to work with the great Patrick Kelly. And Patrick, through her sheer will, Melanie Diamond was this firebrand at Simpsons. Then it was Simpsons, now it's the Bay. Very wide establishment, Arcadian court. Melanie said, I'm bringing Patrick Kelly to Toronto, and I want you to cast it mostly aggressively Black. That's the way Patrick would have done it. And in my mind, I already started feeling Jamaica. I already started to understand myself as a Black man, as a producer. And I said, wow, what a great opportunity. Patrick's thing was, he took the American South with him. He parodied all of the iconography, the buttons and the bows and the cards and the boaters that the Southern people used in their daily lives. And he made it all very chic, you know? And Patrick was a big, big star. So he was the first American designer to be invited to the Chambre Syndicale. He was invited by Pierre Berger of Saint Laurent. These people were examples to me that you bring your culture with. And this, you know, this is really one stank.
What I'm seeing and hearing from everybody is that you know, we as Black people have come from so many different places. And as any creative, you're going to bring your background with you. You know, that's going to come out in your work, come out in how you know, how you are as a person. It's part of you. I mean, I'm so proud of my Jamaican and Grenadian heritage. You know, in New York, there's a guild called the Black Artists and Designers Guild. It's become very well known. They've done a lot of active things within the art community, within the fashion community, within things like that. But you can't just create. You have to create with this background of, I am Black, I'm going to be political, I'm going to make some kind of a statement, I'm going to XYZ. You know, so like when you're hired as a designer and you're Black, they're hiring you because they want some street cred, they want some urban cool, they want something like that. When you're hired as a filmmaker, you're supposed to make some statement about political climate, do a historical piece, a biopic, do a da 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 da. You know, like it's rare that you have a Black movie director like Ava DuVernay who makes A Wrinkle in Time, which is just a fantasy story. I'm a jeweler, and my jewelry does not, you know, use African prints. It doesn't have beads. It doesn't have kente cloth. It's just jewelry. Right? When I paint, when I draw, a lot of it's abstract. It's not making, it's not representational like most art is supposed to be. If you're Black these days, if you reference all the people out there, Kehinde Wiley, Carrie James Marshall, Lorna Simpson, you know, on and on and on. What I would like to see for Black creative people, for any kind of ethnicity, creative people, just create. When does the expectation from other, you know, the people in power of you having to make this statement because of this, why can't we just make it? I think my stank or my mark is the avoidance of, is people having to look at it purely, you know, without not having any knowledge of who that person is behind it. Either it's beautiful or it's not beautiful, but there's no context for you to create a prior judgment.
My creative identity is probably that balance between being on the business side and the creative side. I studied design at OCAD, but before that had done a Bachelor of Commerce in Marketing and bookended that with an MBA. So I'm often sitting in the room, sometimes as a creative person, where I'm expected to be a business voice, and on the business side, where I'm expected to be a creative voice. And I'm comfortable approaching a problem on both sides, but I would say that creativity by far is the driver, because, you know, everyone creative I know is a magician in some way. You make things come out of thin air. And I say to creative people all the time, you have to take your skill very seriously. Creativity is the most valuable resource on the planet, and it's our job to move ideas forward. Capital, resources, everything is going to follow ideas, and that comes from creative people. So while I sit on both sides, creativity is the operating system, the absolute driver.
I was born in England. My parents are Caribbean, and I grew up in Canada, and I grew up in Oakville, Ontario. So I'm basically a small town girl who just sort of moved forward thinking that it's okay to be me. And being in small town Ontario and being one of the few Black families that there were, you stood out just because you stood out. Obviously, coming from a Caribbean background, there are certain rules and regulations in the house in terms of if you are going to do anything, just make sure that you do it twice as good as anybody else. And I'm sure that if there's anybody of color who is listening to this, they have heard the talk. So how that sort of worked into my creativity, and actually to be very honest, my creative identity, I didn't realize what that was until I left Canada. And because I've been living in Milan for almost 20 years, people, when they see me, assume that I'm American. And the first thing I say is, no, I'm Canadian. I'm a very, very proud Canuck. And so what they usually see is Canadian style, not American style. Once I sort of say, okay, well, I'm Canadian, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I do, they can discern and decipher the difference between somebody who is American and somebody who's Canadian. Even with the accent, it's simple things like that. But I think what helped my creative identity was basically being proud of my Caribbean heritage, and also very much proud and embracing my Canadian roots, and just moving forward with the two, melding the two, and creating something that I take with me day to day now.
My mother, seamstress, painter, chef. My father, jewelry maker. My brother, illustrator, painter, sculptor. My sister, voiceover. My brother, Alain, illustrator and toy maker now. Myself, graphic design, videographer, and of course, I'm a shoe designer, first and foremost, fashion designer as well. My background and my stank, my signature comes from a line of entrepreneurs that have never held me back. I'm first generation Haitian Canadian, which is a rare breed in Toronto. There's a lot of population in Montreal, everybody in Montreal. Born in Ottawa, but lived in Toronto for 20 years. I've always had a signature, very much like Lana, like I've had a signature that you couldn't really peg it as much as, it's always been a clean, aesthetic, design orientated. I've had a luxury lifestyle magazine called Chad Quarterly. We're one of probably the first original lifestyle, independent luxury lifestyle publications here in Toronto, which is funny because when a Mercedes or big brands tag Heuer, we go into these, me and my business partner, we were Black, obviously both of us, him being Jamaican, me being Haitian. You imagine that, right? It's just going to these meetings and then finding out that we're two Black men with a luxury lifestyle publication that you could probably never identify that it was from two Black men, which is really crazy. I come from the school of where I've learned from my mother to have a few things and to know how to do things and be able to navigate when you don't have those opportunities. I've been given some opportunities and being taken, opportunities taken from me because of my color. There's a lot of people that I'm meeting here for the first time and they're leaders in what they do. And I'm so proud to actually even be in this, in this, how do I say this, Brady Bunch squared configuration. My signature is from an entrepreneurial background and just knowing how to navigate doing many things to get the job done. And that's why I think I find myself here.
I would say that my looks really define my creative identity, especially in the modeling industry. I'm a very rare Black ginger, there's not a lot of people who look like me. And where I'm from, growing up, I never had anyone or representation for people who look like me. I had Stacey McKenzie later on that I found out about, but yeah, growing up, it was more predominantly white. And so I really struggled with my identity and I always gravitated towards things that were different. And I think as I grow more and more, I'm learning more about my culture, Indigenous and Black. So I think my creative identity is always changing because I'm just now tapping into who I'm supposed to be now while I'm learning and progressing.
So, as I was listening to your answers, I was noticing kind of two distinct themes. Some of you cite your cultural heritage as informing your work and it having a direct influence on what you do. And some of you don't. And both are equally valid. And I think that's a really important takeaway from listening to all of your answers.